Welcome back to another episode of Vivi Nutrition Radio Chat Series. We have been recording because we realized that we're just going to be a realist. I am the only one, if you're watching this on video, that is not wearing a hat, so I'm the one odd out. I missed the memo of wear a hat to work day.
Dude, you need a haircut, man. God. I don't trust Callie to cut my hair too, man. She'd mess it up, and then I'd have to go bald, and it's not a good look.
Mine worked out well. My brother's though, he didn't. He actually I think he kind of did something that was not supposed to happen, and he ended up kind of having the little mohawk thing, but really low, so he looks like he just got out of jail. So.
And now he's flying back to Vegas. Perfect. Sir, could you please step aside? No, we're not worried about COVID. We just need you to step aside.
You look a little sketchy.
You and your friend Samsonite right here.
Yeah.
You mean my
and your $18 fee? God, that's crazy, dude.
Yeah.
I know. Oh, how are you guys doing with this? Another week, another isolation, social distancing week.
Yeah. What day is it? I mean, honestly,
dude,
today
100%. I have no idea.
Quarantine day number lost count.
This day, that day, another day.
Another day. But I thought today, though, I was actually, I think we had a conversation on Monday about this, but at the same time, I was actually just sitting down with GB talking about, over lunchtime. And I was like, what should we talk about? What could be kind of the main topic for today's kind of Chit Chat Series? And I know, I think Tony mentioned it. I think it would be cool to talk about emotional eating. And I think coming from some dudes, I think it definitely would be helpful, because I feel like whether this is directed to women or men, I think it's equally important, particularly men. And Dezi can probably speak for this as well, since you work with a lot of dudes, that a lot of times it's kind of a taboo topic, I guess, for dudes, to really kind of talk about, emotional eating concerns and things like that. So I figured we kind of fired out this conversation today by you guys kind of sharing maybe what do you define as emotional eating? Is there a definition for it? And how can you, or what is the way that you describe it and that you see it yourself?
Don't jump at once.
Yeah, I'll tackle it. All
right, you'll tackle it. What position are you? Are you defense, offense? What are we doing?
Outside linebacker, dude. Shut up so I can talk.
Wow, coming in hard, huh? All right, I'll let you go.
No, man, I think as a coach, clinician, business owner, entrepreneur, I think the way that you package it is really helpful. So I always talk about the first time that I noticed that I was emotionally eating. And I think I've told this story to you guys, and I'll just say it for our listeners right now. I had graduated college, and I was going back home to visit my mom, and I had some mail, and it was from the government. And after I saw how many zeros I owed the government because of loans, I was like, shit, man, I'm going to go make this sandwich that I used to make always as a kid. And I'll tell these clients or people that I'm discussing, hey, this was the moment that this happened for me. And so one, how you package it is going to be huge. And the second thing is, it's crazy because when you talk to a male about emotional eating, it doesn't resonate with them, because to them they see it as weakness. But if you talk to them about hey, do you eat out of boredom? Do you eat to distract yourself? Do you eat just to do something? And I think the way that you package it is so powerful. And I know, Castillo, you're going to be talking a bit more about that this weekend at the summit. So, I mean, you have a take on it that I really love too. So go ahead and go with that.
I don't know what the take is, so I'm just going to sit here and drink my coffee. But I wanted to ask you, before going into it, what was that sandwich, Dezi? I want to know what went in that sandwich.
All right. So my mom used to make this bomb meatloaf. So I would take the meatloaf. I would take a couple slices. Meatloaf. Put it in between bread and then doused it in Tabasco. And it was the most tremendous thing in the world.
That also sounds like a quick trip to the bathroom.
So it was a meatloaf sandwich.
Yeah, it was a meatloaf sandwich. Yeah. So Tony, you freaking puto. your take on it is navigating the mindful eating experience.
I'm messing with you, man.
I set this up for you. It was a nice toss, and you're like, I don't know, I'm gonna sip my coffee.
Well, you said you're gonna tackle me, so I got kind of scared, right? So I didn't want to get tackled. I didn't know you were throwing a pass at me. You said you were playing defense, so we just need to do better communication here, Dezi, right?
Well, we're playing in the same team, so let's
I can't wait till I see you in person again.
Me too.
Yeah, I know, right?
So emotional eating, everything you're talking about. It's funny because this morning, every morning I wake up and I'm like, hey, good morning, Google. And Google's like, hi, Antonio, the temperature outside is this, this, and the other. We're going to play news. And it's typically, especially now with COVID-19, something about WHO, something about Trump, something about coronavirus. And today, out of all days, it talked about eating and how everyone knows we've been out of toilet paper, right? So there's also foods that we've run out of. In Russia, they ran out of sour cream because they use a lot of sour cream. That's their comfort food. And I want to say somewhere in the Midwest, I don't know if it was North Dakota or Iowa, they ran out of tater tots because people are going to their comfort foods right now. Because guess what? They can't control what's going to happen with coronavirus. They can't control what's going to come when they can go back to work. They can't control when they leave their house, but they can control what they eat. And if they can control what they eat, they're going to turn to their comfort foods because now they can control that. And I was like, that's such a powerful message, right? Like, yes, that emotional eating piece, we don't like to talk about it as guys. And thank you for sharing your experience, Dezi. And I know I've had that experience too. And I learned it from my mom. Literally to this day, my mom says, don't bring bread in this house because I will eat the whole loaf. And I'm like, Mom, we need to work on that for you because that's not something that should be happening. Literally, I'll bring a loaf of bread and I'll have a slice or two, completely fine. I'll wake up the next day, the loaf is gone. And I'm like, Mom, what happened? She'll wake up and eat the whole loaf in the middle of the night, right? Like, that's not good for her health. And that's where I learned it from, right? Like, it didn't just come out of me, like, out of the blue. I had to learn it from somewhere, and it was from my mom. And it's sad to say that I did that, but I've seen myself fall into that routine time and time again. But it's about how we get out of it, right? So right now, it's a time where we're all comforted by certain things. Could be watching Tiger King, could be forearm workouts, whatever that looks like for you. But a lot of people are turning to food, right? So food, for me, when I think of my comfort food, my emotional eating, it was definitely about my own body image, and it was lack of fueling. And I noticed that when I wasn't fueling enough, I would just go into these binges and overeat. Dezi, you all right there? See you laughing. I'm over here trying to get emotional. See, this is why we
No, I'm sorry, man. No, I everything you're saying is true, but you did the forearm workout thing, dude. I'm sorry, what we talked about the other
Oh, the forearm workout. I missed that. I mean, I was listening. I was like, I was actually deep into like the whole thing. I was like listening to like the story, man. Like,
oh man, I don't mean to. Sorry, dude. I didn't do a good job of providing space for you, man. I'm sorry, but at the same time, you can't throw those in there and expect me not to laugh.
So back on emotional eating, since we're on the same team, Desi, see, I toss it up and you just leave it hanging. You know, don't tackle me, bro. So I'd have those binge eating moments where I notice like, man, I had such a great week. Now I need to binge eat. So I need to have these cheat days, which I know some of us use in our own coaching, but we use refeed days and not the cheat day methodology. And I noticed my binge eating was always like pizza. Like I could sit and hammer back a pizza without a problem. I remember there's another dietitian, his name is Jeremy. He works in the sports world as well. And he told me once, he's like, you can't eat a whole pizza. And I was like, bruh, watch me. Bet. No problem. You buy it? I'll eat it right now. Yeah. Right on this. I know you talk about that. Yeah. I know you talk about the Little Caesars pepperoni that you used to eat. Right? Like anyone can just throw a pizza in front of me. I could for sure eat it without a problem. And it was because out of emotion that I was just trying to cover up everything I felt like I was lacking. And I put it into the food. And the way I like to explain it to my clients, and we had to talk like this, Nate, the other day, because with the COVID-19, we have all the stress. I actually learned from Claire Tuning, a great intuitive eating dietitian that we all know. She's amazing, great with food puns. But she came on our Facebook group and explained it, and I've started to use it from here out. And it does sound kind of woo-woo, a little strange, but it's so effective. And it's the driver, the backseat driver, right? So what we do is we take our clients through this journey. So imagine I tell my clients, you and I are driving down the highway, right? We have the GPS on. We know where we're going. And you hear someone in the backseat say, hey, X, pull over. We'll call our client today, Joe. Hey, Joe, pull over. And Joe turns over to me and says, hey, Tony, did you hear that? And I say, no, I didn't hear anything. Weird. Okay. So we keep driving, and eventually the child in the backseat starts to grow into someone bigger and starts to yell, hey, Joe, pull over. And Joe says to me again, you don't hear that in the backseat? And I say, no. Eventually, the person in the back seat gets so loud they have a megaphone screaming in your ear saying, "Hey, Joe, pull over." And eventually, you pull over because you're getting annoyed by the question, you're getting annoyed by the noise. And that's stress, right? That's stress eating. That backseat driver is stress eating, and it's telling you to pull over on your journey. Even though the GPS says you still have another 20 miles to go, and I'm right next to you and I'm telling you I'm not hearing it, and you're the only person that can hear it, that's stress eating. That's bored eating, telling you to go eat something and sit in front of a fridge to look at it. Now, what we try to do with our clients is we tell them, name that backseat driver. Because once you humanize it, you can take control. And I've noticed once they've put a name to it, so I've had some really fun names like Kester Williams. I've had a Beatrice. I've had a Fran. I've had a Buck. I've had an Andy, right? These are just all names that they came up with. One of them said Anthony, and I'm like, are you trying to say I'm your backseat driver? They said, no, it was someone else, right? But they were able to humanize it, and they noticed that when they were able to say, hey, let's say Anthony, no, I'm not going to. They noticed that they were able to control that and keep on their journey. They didn't have to pull off on a side exit to listen or indulge into that stress. They were able to manage the stress and keep going. And that
and sorry to interrupt. So that like backseat driver or that backseat person is kind of like the voice in your head, right? That it kind of tells you, like, you know, go in like a kitchen and like, hey, grab some of those, like, you know, for the Midwest people, like tater tots are just gonna be there, and we have plenty of them, and that kind of thing. So it's kind of like that inner voice, like that alter ego, sometimes like people like to call it, that it's like literally kind of telling you, hey, this is gonna make you feel better, right? So yes. This is kind of like that's a pretty good way to, like, I never actually looked at it that way.
Yeah, and I use it for a lot of people. Some people are like, that's a little too out there for me, but most of the time when people hear it and they understand it and they apply it, they say this worked wonders. So I actually just had a client recently. His girlfriend has been telling him, like, man, you've been great success, but it's not going fast enough. And I told him, who is that person? He's like, well, that's my backseat driver, just in person form. They're coming to tell me that my progress isn't going quick enough, and they want me to do different strategies. Like, they want me to go low carb again, but he said I knew how to respond because I knew if I did low carb again, I was just going to bounce back to what I did before, right? So having the answers and knowing that it's not just a backseat driver that's in our heads, but sometimes it's externally, right? Like right now, it's COVID-19 that's telling us what to do. So we need to purchase, buy, or bulk buy tater tots in the Midwest or whatever that is for us, right? Those foods. And we don't notice that we're buying them, right? And eventually we look and we're like, holy shit, what happened? Why did I just eat 2 bags of tater tots?
And how do we create that person? Or how do we, because like this has to go back. And you mentioned obviously like your mom and things like that, but you know, I think that's a really interesting topic, because I tell a lot of my clients, like, you know, your emotional triggers to and using food as a gateway to kind of feel better, it's not something new. And I think it's something so hardwired in your brain that has to come from somewhere. So as an example that I provide to a lot of the people I work with is, you know, when you were a kid, like, you know, think about when you did something good, how were you rewarded? And some people will say, well, actually, my mom would give me these like cookies that I would love, or I would get candy or chocolate, or they would take me to McDonald's or do this or do that. And it's like, do you see the connection? So you connected like happiness with McDonald's, right? So of course that repeated itself so many times that it's literally like a wire, like a literal wire in your brain that is just completely connected. So, and they could come in different forms. It could be actually every time that you got sad, you went to the kitchen and grabbed something when you were a kid, just to kind of take it to your room and hide it or hid it in there. And then you use it as a way to kind of disappear from the world and isolate yourself. So that's, for me, what I think represents like the bigger, like a lot of, in order for you to create awareness around your emotional problem, you need to obviously dive deeper into understanding why it happened in the first place. And I think that's, you know, understanding those triggers is so important.
100%. I agree with that 100%.
Yeah. So
yeah, something. Oh, sorry. I was just going to say, like, along that line, that's usually the way that I describe it to my clients that I work with. And emotional eating, we have to understand that emotional eating is cyclical. So it's what happens is we have a trigger, we have a stressor that perpetuates the urge to eat, right? Coping mechanism, the urge to eat. That eating maybe causes us to overeat. Guilt. right? That guilt can then come back in the form of another stressor. So it's very cyclical in terms of emotional eating for some people. So it's like, where in that cycle can we break it down?
Snake cutting out.
Yeah, I was like,
Nate,
can we kind of cut or
I
with the
think.
stress? Can you hear me? Am I good?
Sorry, bro. I think you
Nate,
kind of cut out in there for a
Nate!
second.
Oh man.
Come
Yeah,
back
so
to us. Come back.
let's kind of like rewind for a second. So like, you know, go back again and just kind of repeat a little bit more about what you were just saying as far as
Yeah.
like
Sorry about that. Yeah, I have no internet, so I'm using my hotspot. So pretty much just saying that emotional eating is a very cyclical process, starting with some type of stress or trigger that going into kind of an urge to eat. If that's your coping mechanism, that causes overeating, that produces guilt. That guilt may lead back into stress. So it's like, where along that cycle can we kind of like nip the line? So is it around the stress component? Can we manage stress in a different way? If we are stressed, can we cope with it in a different way? So I think when people understand the cycle and they understand the parts that they can control in the cycle and where they can kind of nip things and potentially change behaviors around those things, it's like the emotional eating cycle then kind of is not as powerful to them, and they feel that they have more control. So instead of trying to say, okay, emotional eating, like going back to the root cause, great, let's go to the root cause. Now, is coping with that root cause the issue? Is the stress around that main issue and managing the stress? Is that where we can attack it from? So I think there's a lot of different inputs as coaches that we can interject in and really help somebody get through this emotional eating process. And so when Andres, when you're talking about how the trigger, that's, you know, that kind of was what sparked me into kind of talking about this and of it being kind of more of a cyclical process with multiple avenues to intervene.
yeah, I think that's powerful, and I think it's also it's related to making sure that just creating recognition around that and figuring out exactly what those addictive behaviors are and what is kind of like leading you specifically now because you have more time in your hands, so you're more likely like. For example, I was just doing I did like a little workshop with WeWork right before this session, and one of the things that I was just talking about is the fact that, well, if you wake up and the first thing that you do is like check social media and you read some really disturbing news, that kind of sets your mindset to be kind of like in a negative headspace. And a negative headspace is probably not going to make the best decisions. And you may actually recur to using food as a way to kind of calm yourself down. So maybe the typical breakfast that you know you should be doing is going to turn more into like, you know what, I want to have my Honey Nut Cheerios and milk, and then obviously have like some sort of like candy form or something like that, because that's going to make me feel better based on the news that I just received. So it also, it comes down to the environment in which like you're actually placing yourself in, and how are you able to kind of like modify to make sure that you're not kind of setting yourself up to trigger some of those responses, or, you know, that backseat person that is kind of causing that kind of like, you know, situation or emotion, you know?
If I can kind of share on that, because I love the fact that all four of us are teaching this in a really similar way. And I think it's so valuable. You know, as we're talking about, you know, TC, you mentioned like the term normalizing, and that's something that I use all the time. And even in the work that I've done with eating disorders, it's been really helpful to understand the relationship with food and also the power of normalizing their experience. I think as we're talking about this, we're talking about cycles, we're talking about environment. You know, I had a client that would just crush McDonald's. Andres, you mentioned McDonald's, right? So I had a client who was just crushing McDonald's before he stepped in the program. And we were trying to understand why it was happening, because it was happening throughout the whole weekend, like just hours upon hours of just really crushing it. And it was almost, and to me, it was bordering on eating disorder behavior. And I was like, well, tell me a little bit about why this is happening. And as we stepped back into his cycle and his history and his environment with this, he was like, you know what, to be honest, I never took my parents' divorce really well. You know, it happened 10 years ago, and it's something that I still struggle with. And I was like, okay, yeah, you know, as someone who has had divorced parents too, I was like, hey man, like I definitely resonate with that. It's really hard. Where does McDonald's come in the mix? And he's like, dude, if I'm thinking back, like those were the happiest times. Like my parents would take us, me and my brothers, to McDonald's, and that was our family time. Like we didn't have a whole lot of money growing up, and that was our time. And I was like, okay. I was like, do you think there's any sort of connection between missing your family and McDonald's? And he was like, oh, I don't know, man. I was like, hey, you know, we're talking about cycles here. We're talking about the feeling and the comfort that you get from taking this action. You know, who's to say that maybe calling your mom or dad during these times when you're really missing them, that it won't fulfill that. And so we normalized that experience. And it was actually really cool to see the trajectory from where he went to just crushing McDonald's into developing a healthier relationship with it, where it's like, hey, if I feel like I miss them, I have decisions here. I have choices where I can call them, or I can go to McDonald's. And it's done in a way where, like, I think we all help our clients to follow to a large degree the balanced plate model and balancing our macronutrients and stuff like that. And so that to see him do that, man, like even tell the story to this day, I get almost teary eyed, because like I remember it was such a source of shame for him.
Yeah. And what's if you guys can define, like, because we hear this all the time, what is really the definition for a relationship with food? Because I don't think we've ever we talk about it all the time. Like, I want to develop a better relationship with food. Maybe for your mom, Tony, is, you know, not necessarily like crushing a loaf of bread in one sitting in the middle of the night when you're not even hungry. But, you know, for other people represents different things. So like, if I was just say my relationship with food is making sure that I look at food as fuel, and that is going to make me feel better, and not necessarily seeing it as a driver for fatness or for or this is going to be stored in like this side of my body, or like that
La
kind of
chincha.
stuff. Yeah, like the caucho, how we say in Venezuela. You know, like, what I think everybody has a different perspective on what that represents or what that means. So what is yours?
Yeah, I mean, with relationship with food, I would agree with you 100% on that. It's like food is fuel, but it took me years to understand that. Like growing up and going through meal plans, going through diets, going through school for nutrition, I never got a clear understanding until I started to work with athletes. And it's crazy to think that's when I learned. When I went to go work, and this was at the University of Florida, I went to work there and I noticed that it was kind of what we taught people was like, do you want to look good as a Calvin Klein model, or do you want to perform at your best? Right? And they were like, well, I want to perform my best. I want to win a championship for my school and then go win an Olympic medal. Right? And it's like, holy shit, they're eating to perform at their best. They don't care what they look like. They don't have to be lean as shit to be the best. No, that's actually going to hurt them. For example, for swimmers, right? They don't have fat to help them be buoyant. They're not going to be able to, it's going to take them harder to swim. So it's seeing that. And I was able to apply it to myself to be like, why am I eating this way? What are the things I'm doing? And my relationship with food honestly was messed up. And I didn't know until I started to work with athletes and see, holy shit, food is actually my fuel. And I know we say that all the time, but seeing it actually affect people and how they perform is really what helped me understand it and what my relationship to food was because of that. Because again, coming from a relationship where I saw my family members wake up in the middle of the night, eat a loaf of bread, or not eating certain foods after a certain time, especially in the Latin culture. Don't eat fruit after 4 p.m. because you're going to get fat. It's like, what? Where is the science behind this, right? And then you get to see family. Oh, you're getting fat. Oh, you're getting too skinny. Oh, you need to eat more. Oh, you need to eat less. So that was my relationship with food first. And then when I actually started to work with people and understand how nutrition affected them, my relationship changed because it was more, what is it doing to help me perform at my best?
Interesting. So I guess like the question now is like, how do you teach somebody to overcome emotional eating? How do you teach somebody how, you know, what are like the key strategies you guys use to help people identify that, to help them kind of like shed light on what is happening, how is it happening, and what are some ways that you can take to overcome it and to work on it on a daily basis? Because it's not like a little, like, you know, flip a switch type thing. It obviously requires some time. So what are some of the tactical things that maybe for people listening in that may be resonating with this a lot could take away from this, and that they can kind of maybe start to self-reflect on, to maybe start to work on this area?
I mean, I have an assignment that I've done, you know, when I work with eating disorders that I like to use now as someone who's really struggling with it. And it's helping them figure out what their 5 biggest food rules are. And what I'll do is I'll have them kind of list the rules. So like, just for an example, like no fruit after 4. And we'll go through like, okay, where was this behavior from? Was it something that you learned from a parent, a coach, whatever it is? All of these external forces helped us to develop our relationships with food. And some of them are more positive and some of them are absolutely negative. And so we'll go down the line of saying like, okay, was this helpful or hurtful? Okay, it's hurtful. All right. So if you don't eat after 4, whatever it is, what sort of reward system do you get from this? Well, I feel comforted that I'm doing the right thing. Well, in fact, and I'll ask them like, are you doing the right thing? Are you hungry? And so it helps them devise a way where first it normalizes their experience. And second, it's like, okay, now that we have this information, what can we do with this? And I'll provide them with other opportunities to say, hey, if you're looking for comfort by not eating past 4, what are some other ways in which you can feel comforted? Well, I can also feel comforted by sitting down just to eat when I'm hungry. Okay, cool. It sounds incredibly basic, yet at the same time, it offers them an opportunity to take action on some of these things. And so I tend to use that exercise that I've used in working with eating disorders because it helps them to develop their relationship with food by noticing how the past has helped them develop where they're at today.
I love that, Dezi. That's awesome. One of the things that I do is just kind of in line with what you're saying, Dezi, on like bringing this awareness, right, and bringing to the forefront what people's beliefs are, and kind of working through that with them, is in essence having the conversation or allowing the client to have the conversation with themselves when they are going to the fridge, right? So Tony, I know we did something similar with like boredom eating, right? We're kind of going to umbrella all this, right? Is stopping and having that conversation, because I think a lot of times people emotionally eat, but they don't even realize that they're doing it. They think they're hungry, they're just going to these foods. So it's about those moments of pause and reflection and saying, okay, am I eating out of emotion, out of boredom, out of whatever that looks like, or am I eating to fuel myself? When was the last time I ate? Things like that, kind of having these conversations and bringing awareness to when are they actually having these moments of emotional eating versus when are they actually fueling themselves. And so I've even had clients that have like put up a little sticky note or a piece of paper, they taped it to their fridge, and they'll write down like, whether or not it's out of boredom or emotion, or whether they're fueling themselves, and we'll go over that. And so I think that awareness for them, they're like, Nate, I didn't even realize like the majority of the times I was going to the fridge was more emotional based versus more of a fueling, especially now when people aren't as active. So that's kind of an activity that I've used. And I know Tony and I, we've talked about that in our Facebook group.
Yeah, it's the hunger scale. I think we spoke about it last time. We did, so I think, Dezi, you said that you saw on Instagram or somewhere someone put like on their fridge, like, shut the door, you're not hungry, you fat fuck. Right? So
oh yeah.
I said it. It was like one of my clients that literally put it on there.
So
okay, because I remember you saying that. Yeah.
So I had a client just put a sheet on their fridge that just said, hungry, yes or no. If they're hungry, what are you eating? No, what are you replacing with it? So they do like a bottle of water because they were just thirsty. And they actually noticed, I got feedback from them. They said, this helped me out so much because it felt like I had an accountability partner right there. And I noticed that I wasn't hungry. I was just going to bored eat, right? It's something so simple. It's just a yes, no column. That's it. And what we did is we looked at everything they ate when they were hungry and able to work on those things, right? So he was already choosing oranges for snacks if he was hungry. I'm like, okay, that's not bad. You had an orange. It's not like you decided to binge eat, which he has a challenge with, like a pint of Haagen-Dazs ice cream, right? You made a better choice, and that's all we can look at.
Yeah, I think I saw a picture similar to the one that I shared about that, the fridge one, where somebody actually taped a bikini on the fridge and read something like "Summer's coming, bitch." So that's
and some people respond to that, man. I think you gotta also know your person.
Some people like the humorous part of it and stuff like that. But I think those are great ideas. I always like tell my clients, every time that you ask yourself, or every time that you feel the need to eat, you need to ask yourself. And I learned this, from a common person that Tony and I have in common with a former boss, which is like, are you hungry enough to eat carrots? And kind of like creating this like kind of like algorithm in your brain. So like, okay, like I really want to go to the fridge and grab something to eat, right? So the question is like, are you actually hungry to eat carrots or something like that is not necessarily chocolate or something that it just sounds good at any given time? And then if the answer is yes, then okay, you may need a meal and you may need to look at obviously what have you had today to eat, and what are some of the things that maybe you need to kind of work on, and how can you feel your body? If the answer is no, usually that kind of follows by, well, are you thirsty right now? Well, yes, I kind of am. So, okay, like drink a glass of water, figure out exactly how that makes you feel, and see if you're still kind of answering no's or yes to those kind of questions. And the answer is no, I'm not hungry to eat enough carrot, and no, I'm not thirsty, or I already kind of like went through that. Then most likely your need and drive to eat something out of the fridge is coming out of a place of emotion, not necessarily out of a place of a physiological need. So you need to obviously kind of identify those things. So last week on my Facebook community, I kind of talk about, well, what I like to kind of describe as like the 5 steps to managing emotional eating. So I think, and I think we all, everything that you've all said, they kind of fall somewhere in between all those, like, steps. So the step number 1 that I kind of shared that point was, number 1 is like, you need to look at the way that you're eating. So if your emotional eating is coming because you're binging at nighttime, because you're being fasting and not eating anything throughout the entire day, okay, then that's maybe something that needs to change, because your emotional eating is just simply coming out of a place of, well, you're not really feeling your body enough. So that's number 1. Step 2 is recognize addictive behaviors. Like, well, are you actually kind of connecting? Like, I give you an example today in this workshop I did. Like, let's say that you're working on something that you hate doing, like you don't like to do that. When I was in clinical, when I did my clinical rotations, I remember like charting for me, what's like a fucking nightmare. Like I hated to do that thing, and I would
hate
try
charting.
and I would try to put it away, put it up, and then a lot of people try to avoid doing the things that they don't want to do, and guess what? They replace it with to go in and grab it in a snack. So recognizing those addictive behaviors, and I usually tell people, write them down. Why is this stuff happening? And like, are you seeing a pattern? Step number 3 is separating those hunger cues from emotional cues using that little algorithm that I said, like, are you hungry enough to eat a carrot? Or if you're not, maybe this is just an emotional cue, and what can you do instead of like, eating? Number 4, creating a schedule, because that kind of goes in line with number 1. If you have kind of like a schedule to making sure that you're getting enough fuel throughout the day, you most likely are not going to kind of maybe experience this kind of activities that may happen, because you're kind of changing the way that you eat. And step number 5 is substituting healthy activities to replace those emotional triggers, which is going to be like going on a walk, or like, like getting a workout in if it's time for you to do that, or trying maybe journaling or doing something different that can replace that routine that you have. Like, if you start to look at the anatomy of a habit is actually separated into a trigger, a routine, and followed by a reward. So if you change your routine, you can change obviously the habit, and then overall create a new one. And that's really kind of how that type of course, this is all easier said than done, but it's kind of like a good kind of step-by-step process to kind of help you identify it, right? So kind of helps from that perspective.
I would have said step 1, if you want to manage this, is hire a dietitian, but to each his own. Like, find someone that you can work with. Yeah. Hey, I'll say it, because there's so many people out here that just prescribe things that don't know what they're doing, and they say they can help you with it, but they have no experience with it, right? Like Dezi having experience with eating disorders, that was a huge piece. The 5 food rules, was it helpful? Was it hurtful? And how else can you get comfort? I've never heard that, and I think that's a huge win, right? And again, I'm not an expert in eating disorders. If someone came to me with eating disorder, I'd be like, well, probably better suited for Dezi, right? Because he has these tools in his toolbox, not Joe Schmo who just shows up shredded on Instagram. If you want that, just go to Andres's page. He's shredded. All right. Yeah, baby.
Well, now here's a very interesting question though. Like, what do you tell people though if they fall prey to it? And like, what do you do in the aftermath? Let's say, for example, the people that suffer from pretty intense like binge eating disorders, and whether it's diagnosed or not, or let's say, for example, you fell for it and you went in and you had like the whole loaf of bread or like the whole thing of chocolate, like I think a lot of people experience that kind of sense of guilt, and that I feel so bad that I just had this and I wasn't even hungry. And some people even have described this as, I feel disgusted with myself. And obviously that leads to a path of like very unhealthy behaviors and mindset. And just, that's kind of what creates cycles. So what do you do if you fucked up in your mind? You know, in your mind, you actually kind of had that entire like packet of Oreos instead of just having two, right? Like, what do you tell yourself, or how do you deal with that kind of situation? I want to hear your perspectives on this.
Man, I've been incredibly fortunate to work, and you know, my wife is a eating disorder therapist, and so I feel so grateful, one, to be married to her, and also to have worked with her, and that's where we met. You know, I've been incredibly grateful to work with some amazing people, because you know, Brené Brown gets thrown in the mix, and I'm sure that we all know who that is. So she's a shame researcher, and one of her best TED Talks, she talks about the power of vulnerability, and how oftentimes with eating disorders, it's all done with shame. And so she talks about in this TED Talk, you know, you need three things in order to grow shame in a petri dish, if you will. So it's silence, judgment, and secrecy. So the only antidote to this is empathy. And with that being said, the thing that I always try to bring out when that happens with people is to help them understand, like, first, before you can even be vulnerable, tell your story, before you can even release the shame of what's happening here, one, you need to feel safe. Oftentimes, and you know, we love our families, and sometimes you know, we can't choose them, and the way that they talk about us or talk to us, they might not be safe people. And so it's going back to finding your tribe where you can be safe with them, so that you can be vulnerable in your experience enough to say, you know what, I just crushed that whole bag of cookies, and this is how I'm feeling. And sometimes just the validation of, hey man, I've done that too, or like, you know what, that makes total sense why that shit is super hurtful. I think that in itself is just a really good primary step from someone who can actually acknowledge that they have an eating disorder, and then someone who's really on the fence of like, man, is this an eating disorder? I don't really know, but it sounds really bad. So no, I don't have a fucking eating disorder. So it's like stuff like that I think is just so powerful.
Yeah, that's huge. I've heard of her TED Talk. She's awesome.
And just to kind of go on like how to get over that, I recently just had a client say, I ate a pizza with my girlfriend and then we had burgers afterwards. And like you said, Andres, he said, I felt bloated. I felt disgusted. I felt terrible, right? Like these strong words we use against ourselves that we would never use towards someone else, right? Like we would never tell someone like, you're disgusting, like in a sense, because you ate a burger. At least we hope not. There are people out there that will, but we hope that you are not circling around those people. But how do you get them to break that is just telling them that it's okay to eat and just move on to the next meal. Don't guilt yourself, because that's something I used to fall trapped to. Like those cheat days, I would eat everything and anything under the sun. Then the next day I would eat a salad and do 2 hours of cardio, right? Because I felt guilty. I felt disgusted about myself. I felt disgusted the way I eat. So stopping that cycle and making those foods okay. So for some people, I include it in what their goals are for that week. Like some people, I'm like, all right, you're going to have a milkshake this week. All right, you're going to have 2 slices of pizza this week. And they're like, what? You're telling me I get to have 2 slices of pizza this week? I'm like, yes. You can have your fried chicken, whatever that looks like. So allowing yourself to eat it, but you don't need to binge it. So when they do binge it, you say, hey, it's all right. We're going to try again next week. But don't feel guilty about it. So making it okay to eat the food, and then just adding other things so you don't binge it. So always have veggies, right? Have some carrots with the fried chicken. If you get wings, it always comes with carrots and celery. Instead of throwing them away, eat them with the chicken wings, right? So trying to find a way to include it and tell them not to feel guilty. And by not having guilt is by having small portions of it. At least that's what I found has worked pretty well.
Dude, I love that too. Having been in your guys' Facebook group, which, shout out, team NFP, right?
Squad.
Squad.
I haven't been invited to that. How do I sign up for that?
Probably haven't even accepted it, bro.
Is that like an exclusive, like private, like group that, only certain people get like the card to get invited to?
Yep. F.A., you're part of it, dude. I know you're part of it because you've liked or commented on something before. Or one of your BAs.
That's not him.
I'll check.
So I just get a like and no comments. Like that ain't even Andres. What a bitch. No, but having been in your very exclusive Facebook group that Andres, you are not fucking invited to. I see your clients do that, and that's like a really cool thing to see, where it's celebrating fried chicken and not getting in a place of like, well, now I got to do X amount of burpees. So I think that in itself, man, both male and female, because I've seen it on both ends in the group, man. That's just something that I really love seeing. And to me, as a as an expert, you know, as a clinician, it's like, man, like I respect the people that they're working with, because that's development with a good relationship with food right there.
Nice.
Appreciate that. Oh, there it is.
11 months ago. Yeah, there we go. Okay.
No,
I know.
Dezi, we appreciate that, man, and honestly, the work that you do as well in your group is amazing. A lot of the things that we kind of, at least some of the things that we're trying to instill, you know, they've come from the things that you've talked about, and I think it's really, you know, Tony and I's objective with individuals is making them realize the longevity of this game called health and wellness that we play, and really realizing that it's not a one-day thing. It's not a 1 week thing, right? And when we look at it in terms of, okay, if we were to commit to this for an entire year, 365 days, well, if you had that once or twice a week where you were able to kind of enjoy yourself without the guilt, give yourself that permission and enjoy yourself, what does that look like in an entire year, right? If you're, you know, on the other side, you're very serious, you're committed, you know, whether you're doing macros or whether you're doing behavior-based, you know, you're crushing your goals. I think it's allowing them to realize the longevity and just how long this marathon is, and realizing that if we get caught up in the day-to-day stuff, if we get caught up in like the daily slip up or the weekend where we fall off and we let that kind of tumbleweed into something bigger, we're only hurting our progress later on down the road. Whereas if we just allow ourselves to go out and have brunch without any guilt, right? Just create those memories. When we give ourselves that permission, then that guilt suddenly goes away. And so I think as long as coaches, we're still holding them accountable, you know, obviously with their goals, but really just showcasing like, hey, it's okay to go out and do this, the whole 80-20 philosophy that I know a lot of us share. It's like that 20%, people don't realize how important that 20% is for sustainability, right? We tend to even then focus on that 80% but we lose sight of that 20%. And I think when we allow our clients to really allow themselves to be okay with that 20% without the guilt and remove that guilt, then the relationship with food starts to change, right? They start to say, okay, well, I'm going to go enjoy this donut because I fucking love donuts and this is going to make me happy. And this is contributing to the mental health side of things, right? And so that's kind of how we've been able to reframe it.
Yeah. I feel like it's that analogy that I think is like a toy analogy. Like if you give a kid and you tell him like he cannot touch that toy, like kid's gonna touch the toy and then he's gonna try to like, you know, steal it or whatever, like, you know, versus like if you kind of give him the option and says like, hey, you can grab it if you want to, he's not gonna feel as inclined to actually kind of like try to take it or something just to kind of play with it. So, you know, the same kind of thing applies to food. If you kind of giving yourself a prohibition on specific things and then you kind of, you know, you give them the names like, okay, this is bad and this is good, which that's another thing too, that I think it's hurting our that relationship with food that we have. It just only kind of creates more, you know, I have the bad things when I'm not focusing on my diet and I have the good things when I need to kind of refocus on everything. So when I give my 100% instead of my 80-20, then I'm going to give everything on that. But then eventually I'm just going to go completely like 180 and I'm just going to have everything that is like bad because I'm just not focused on my health right now. Right. And that kind of creates that cycle that, you know, the dieting industry kind of thrives on and, you know, that makes money off of that. It's knowing psychologically speaking that, you know, men and women are going to fall prey to not being consistent and not creating sustainability. And that's why, you know, there's always going to be the next big diet and the next big thing that will, you know, people will do. And then what we teach, it's just doesn't really sound as cool or as sexy and whatever. And then people are just always going to go for like the next big shiny object and leading into just something that is not sustainable, I feel like, you know?
Absolutely.
So
100.
Cool. Well, this was fun. I think this is definitely a pretty impactful episode. Anything else you guys wanted to share before we kind of wrap it up for the day?
I have to go get my Instacart order. It's outside, so
go get your Instacart order. Well, guys, thank you so much for taking time.
No one else gets the comment. Sorry, I ended it for you guys.
No, I was gonna say, like on a serious note, as we were talking about before, in terms of men and men kind of feeling like this subject doesn't pertain to them or they feel some type of way talking about their emotions around food. For any guy that's that's listening to this or watching the live footage, man, just know that first off, you're not alone. And it's okay to reach out to somebody. I think like Dezi was saying, find your safe zone. You don't have to share everything with everybody, but find the people that you have comfort with. If that's people in your family, if that's friends, whoever you feel safe around, but understand that it's important to talk about, and it's part of just growing as a human being and as a man, to move forward in our own progress. And for anybody that's listening that may be hesitant or may be reluctant, just know that us four gentlemen here, we've all had our stories, we've all had our battles, but it was through talking and it was through finding, people to surround ourselves with that we could be safe around and could talk about it. That obviously has led us to where we're at today. So I just wanted to end it on at least from my part, to end it on that note, because I do know that men struggle with this, and it's definitely something that men like us need to talk about more of. Yeah.
Big time.
Yeah, man, I'm all about masculinity and vulnerability, man. I think these conversations need to happen more. So I know I put my 2 cents in the text message of what we want to talk about. So I'm glad we went this way. So
Yeah.
Much love to you, gentlemen. Let's go.
Yes.
Awesome.
Yes.
Well, thank you so much for joining the Vivi Nutrition weekly Chit Chat series, and for you guys listening in and all the audience. Thank you guys so much. Of course, if you guys want to listen to more from any of us in specific topics, make sure you reach out. And of course, if you want to reach out to any of these gentlemen, always the show notes contain all the links directly to their social media pages and websites in case you want to reach out or chat with them. So as usual, your reviews are super impactful. So if you leave us one, we'll be forever grateful. So again, thank you guys so much for listening to another episode of Vivi Nutrition Radio, and we'll see you guys next week.